It was the middle of summer and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in the Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away and it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mum had made me some pulled pork and some pasta for me to heat up and eat whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and I saw that it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long in showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on the phone scrolling through Reddit and Twitter and whatnot, when I heard my front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained in, trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself and slowly walked down the stairs to check it. So the stairs to my kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old as shit and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down 12 of the stairs, so when I got to the second last stair right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen. I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew that I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise, and there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen even if there were burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally telling myself off for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid and just normally walked down the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me. Perfectly still with a massive smile across his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up a little behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it was the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realise how fucking creepy this situation was. But in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping, pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen. My heart was beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put up a chair against the doorknob like you see on the TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and nearly in tears told the operator what had happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, in particularly the fetal position, staring at the door, praying that a cop would be here soon, I noticed a light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralysed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying that the man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I did want to move my arms to bring the phone up to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe and I opened the door to the two of them just standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays my parents don't leave me home alone anymore, thank God. And I check every lock in the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing alright. Even working with the sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street smiling under a lamppost. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but regardless, let's not meet ever again. Do you ever sit back and watch horror films and get the shit literally scared out of you, but then when it's over you go back to your paranormal free life and just chill? I'd like to say that the chill part of my life is over and the paranormal part is oh so present. I live in a quiet town and nothing ever happens here, and I mean nothing. I live with my dad and my younger sister. He and my mum divorced years ago and I haven't seen her since. What a woman, right? It was a cold winter day. My dad was at work and my little sisters were staying at a friend's house. I was sitting in the living area with a cup of hot chocolate watching Annabelle. Just as it was getting to the climax of the movie, I heard a knock at my window. It scared the shit out of me. Naturally, I jumped and I spilled some of my drink on me. Thankfully, I was wearing a very thick sweater, or I would have scorched myself. I looked up to see a messy, brown-haired teenager with dark brown eyes staring at me through the window. I broke eye contact so fast and blinked a few times to see if I was creating images in my head. But when I looked up, she was still staring. She lifted her unnaturally skinny arm up and pointed with what looked like a broken finger to the front door. My first thought, I'm not opening that damn door. Then I noticed that she was hardly wearing any clothes, and it was close to 20 degrees outside and still snowing. I got up and slowly walked to the door. She hadn't moved from that position. I turned the knob and cracked the door open. "Can I help you?" "Is your father home?" she said. Her voice was one of the strangest sounds I'd ever heard. It was a faint whisper, but her words were so sharp and peculiar. She enunciated so strongly, making sure I heard every letter. Her mouth wasn't very pleasing to look at. Her lips were disgustingly cracked and I couldn't understand how she was even able to move them. "My, have you grown? Is your father home?" She definitely threw me off guard with this last line. I let it go. "No, he isn't. Can I leave a message?" "Will you let me inside so I can wait for him?" Chills went through my body. I opened the door a little bit further and saw that she was wearing a green tank top, blue jeans and some sneakers. She looked too young to be asking for my father, and I wasn't going to let her in, so I had to think of a lie. "I'm actually about to leave and won't be back until later." She stood there with her eyes piercing into my soul, and I realised that she hadn't been blinking. "What's your name?" Still no response. She continued to stare at me. "Okay, I'll tell him you stopped by." I closed the door, double locked it of course, and walked back towards my seat. I slowly sat down, watching the front door. I expected to see her through the window, walking off of our porch at least, but that never happened. There was no way I'd be able to miss her. That only meant one thing. I slowly made my way back to the door and looked out the peephole. There she was, just standing there looking directly at me, through the fucking peephole. I ran back to the chair and grabbed my phone to call my dad. "Hey sweetie, you know I'm at work. What's wrong?" "Dad, Dad, there's a girl standing outside the door asking for you and she's creeping me out. He fucking laughs at me. What's her name? She wouldn't say, she was just staring at me, so I closed the door. Is she trying to get in? No, she's just standing there being weird. Can you come home? Honey, I'm about to go to a meeting. If she tries to come in at all, call the police, okay? Make sure the doors are locked and stay away. I'm sure she's not going to hurt you. I'll see you when I get home. He hung up before I could say anything. I went back and looked out the peephole. She was gone. I looked at my phone and it was 1:17 p.m. My dad wasn't getting off until 5 p.m. So I did what anyone in their right minds would do. Closed all the curtains, made sure every door and window in the house was locked and took all of my stuff upstairs to my room. I had no plans of finishing Annabelle after that encounter. I got upstairs to my room, opened my laptop and turned on South Park. Vulgar and animated is what I needed. It was 4:45 p.m. I was overly eager for my dad to get back. I even sent my sister a text asking her to come home, but she wasn't having it. I peeked out of my window to see if it was still snowing, but all I saw was that girl from earlier running up and down the street, up and down the street, up and down the street. It was a sight that cannot be erased from the human mind. Her arms weren't moving, just her legs. And the stranger part about it was, she was going so fast not to be moving them. My heart started beating faster and I was sweating excessively. Then she stopped. She looked right up at my second floor window and began walking towards my house. She kept her head facing the way I was and her body moved forward, and I was sure I'd faint. She walked up the steps to my porch and I could no longer see her. I thanked myself for locking the doors. I thanked myself until I heard the front door open. How? In a panic, I closed my laptop so I could make sure I heard the right thing. Then the door slammed shut, confirming my thoughts. I got up and quietly locked my bedroom door. What I expected to hear next was footsteps slowly making their way up to the top of the stairs, like they do in horror films. But that's not what happened. She ran up those stairs so fast that by the time I got to my phone, she was already scratching on the door. It was an awful sound. I watched my doorknob slowly turn, wondering how she was able to magically open my door as she pleased. I also wondered why she had been so polite in the first time. My door opened and I screamed so loud. She didn't advance towards me, but rather just stood there, as she did before. But this time it was worse. "Is your father home?" I found it hard to speak words until her voice grew louder. "Is your father home?" I closed my eyes and put my head down. Tears started flowing uncontrollably. No, but he should be here soon." "Are you lying to me? Where is he hiding?" I couldn't speak. I just kept my head down and continued to cry. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." I felt her hot breath on my ear. I opened my eyes and she was right in front of me. She had the most sinister look on her face. Her mouth tightened and her eyes grew smaller. Within seconds, her whole body began to shake. I became distracted by the sound of a car door closing. I glanced out to the window and saw my father walking towards the porch. Thank goodness, I hurried to the window and opened it to yell to my father. She's in my room, Dad!" The woman snapped out of her trance when she heard the front door open and she ran out of my room before I could take a second to breathe. I ran after her, worried about my father. I got downstairs and saw her and my father facing each other. I had never seen such a big man look so horrified. She started walking closer to him. My dad said, "Amelia? Look at what you did to me, Tom." "Dad, is that really you?" I could see tears running down my dad's face. "You let them kill me." Her words left me with nothing but fear as I tried to make sense of that statement. My dad stood there, silent. as she took her hand and rubbed it along his face. I could tell he was afraid to talk. "I loved you," he replied. I'm sorry." "Where is she?" My dad turns her head to face me. The woman follows. She walks over to me and puts her lips on my ear again. "Beautiful." She kisses me on the cheek and my whole body tenses up. She starts shaking rapidly once again. My dad runs over and grabs me tight. She goes still and turns back to my father. "Tell her the truth or I'll kill you." My dad and I just stand there looking at her. She makes her way to the door and turns back to me one last time before leaving. "I'll be back for you, darling." She slams the door shut. Completely shaken up, I turn to my dad for answers. Me: "Dad, who is she?" She's your mother." A 900-pound weight sat in the pit of my stomach as I tried to make sense of what he just said. "What do you mean she's my mother?" There was silence. "Caroline is my mother." My dad stared at me with sorrowful eyes, trying to find the right words. "Call your sister and tell her to come home. I want you both to hear this." After sitting with my dad in silence for half an hour, my sister arrived. She opened the door and looked at us with the strangest expressions. She asked, "What is going on?" My dad said, "Sit down, I need to talk to the both of you." She looks at me for answers and I just shrug. That was all I could do. My dad then said, "The August before my senior year of high school, a girl named Amelia moved across the street from my house with her parents. We never really spoke until one night I was taking the trash out and she was sitting on her porch. She spoke to me first, said she was bored and asked if I wanted to hang out with her for a few hours while her parents were at a dinner party. I figured, why not? She was a strange looking girl, but I was pretty nerdy, and she was the first girl to ever pay me any attention. We went up to her room and we spoke for a while. She eventually put on a movie. One thing led to another, and I went home that night feeling very guilty about the whole thing. I don't know why. I never spoke to her again until a few weeks later when she told me she was pregnant. I didn't know what to do, so I told my father. I was angry because I was graduating around the time that she would be giving birth and didn't want to deal with that. One night, my dad began to break down, worse than before. "Can we talk about this in the morning?" he said. "You owe me this," I said. My sister said, "I don't even know what's going on." My dad got up and went upstairs, crying more than ever. I was so mad at him for not telling me what I needed to know. I hadn't even begun to think how hard it would be to explain to my sister that there's a dead woman claiming to be my mother, but I told her. I told her everything that happened while she was gone, and naturally she wanted to sleep with me that night. And so it begun. Around 1 AM I woke up to the sound of someone gently locking up my window. I struggled to open my eyes and regretted it once I did. I looked at my window and there she was, staring at me. This time her pupils were dilated and she still wasn't blinking. Her bony fist continued knocking and I couldn't find my voice to scream, so I violently shook my sister awake. I shouted, "That woman is back!" My sister sat up, looked at the window, and we both started crying. "How is she standing? We're on the second floor." Sophie and I jumped up and ran to my bedroom door. As soon as we opened it, we could see feet at the doorway dangling above us. Amelia slowly began to bring her feet to the ground, and then we froze with fear. "Come, darling." Once she landed, she reached out her hand to take mine. Her hair was messier than before, and there were dents in her face. Sophie let out a piercing scream. "Take my hand." I stood there and closed my eyes so I didn't have to see her staring into my soul like she did before. Her body started shaking rapidly again, and Sophie and I ran down the stairs, my dad soon to follow in panic. I remember Sophia saying, "Dad, I'm scared." And then I replied, "What does she want, Dad? Can you just make her go away?" I was angrier with him now because I knew whatever was happening was his fault. We all stopped when we heard footsteps running. Soon we saw her come running down the stairs. She got to the end, stopped and looked at us. Her eyes slowly rolled to the back of her head and stayed there. She continued running up and down the stairs chanting, "Tell her, Tom, tell her." Every time she would say it, her voice would get higher in pitch until she was shrieking. We all covered our ears. Me, "Dad, please." My dad's sister and I all huddled together in a corner holding each other. Amelia disappeared, and then we heard a noise come from the fireplace. We turned to it. She was sitting inside of it watching us. This time her voice was deep and demonic. My dad quickly began telling us the rest. He then said, "One night in April, it was raining. I was getting something out of my dad's car, and she was standing on her porch. She called for me to come over, and I told her I had to get back inside. She said it would only take a second. I denied her, and she began crossing the street. My dad held my sister and me as he struggled to finish the story. She had almost made it to the other side when a car struck her. They didn't even stop. I ran over to her and she looked me painfully in the eyes and said, 'Help.' I was the worst human being in the world because I went back inside like nothing had happened. I figured someone else heard it and would come out. I knew my parents were sleeping so they wouldn't ask me questions. I didn't want to be a father so bad at the time that I was willing to let her and the baby die. I released myself from my father's grip and let the tears fall down my face. He hadn't wanted me. In that moment, I felt like he deserved everything that was happening. He then said, "The next day, my parents told me that Amelia was killed by a drunk driver the night before. They told me they were able to save the baby. You were so beautiful. I felt so guilty, knowing I could have saved her too. So I told my dad I wanted you to live with us. I chose to go in college in town so I could see you every day. I didn't stop having nightmares about Amelia until I met Carolyn." Sophie looked as angry as I was at my father. I didn't want to hold it against him because I knew how tough it would have been to raise a child at that age, and he's been such a good father to me. But letting someone die is something I wasn't going to forgive him for. It was evil. My dad turned to Amelia, who was still sitting in the fireplace. "What do you want, Amelia?" She said, "I want my baby. I want my baby." He then said, "I'll give you anything else but her. You can't take her." Chills kept going through my body as I watched my dad plead with this woman, hoping he would win and wondering what would happen if he didn't. She moved closer to my father in silence. Her eyes rolled back to the front of her head. "Then I'll take you." She grabbed my father's legs and dragged him out of the door so fast before my sister and I were able to react. The next thing I heard will haunt me forever. My sister and I ran out to see my dad lying in the middle of the street bleeding. Amelia was gone. The person who was in the car jumped out and fell to his knees. He looked up at me and Sophie and said, "He just ran out in the middle of the street. I didn't even see him." We knew that the police wouldn't believe our story, so we let it be. They came and took my father's body away, and it was the most heartbreaking thing that I have ever witnessed. That night, my sister and I were in the living room waiting for her mum to come and get us. It was 5 a.m. and we both sat in silence trying to comprehend what had happened while crying silently. I don't know what led me to do this, but I looked up at the window. There was a new message written on it. "Goodbye, Mummy loves you." My sister and I were left home alone for the night because our parents were attending the graduation party of one of my brother's friends. Frankly, I was looking forward to a night of freedom, and I also happened to be closer with my sister than I was with anybody else. After they left, we watched a movie and played some games. I was only about 11 at the time and she was 15, so my judgment varied from hers greatly. It was around 10 when both of us noticed a flashing light on the wall across from us. This shimmering was clearly coming from the front door, which was mostly made up of a window that allowed all light to pass through. We was a bit unsettled because we lived in a remote area and seldom had visitors. I had no sense of threat since I was too young, and I told her that I would check it out. When I went to peer out of the front door, I saw a cluster of maybe 3 cars making their way around the loop we had in the front of our house. To be clear, this wasn't shared with any other houses. In fact, we didn't live in a neighbourhood, it was a private drive. I figured they were probably lost and just turning around as their cars left abruptly. I explained the situation to my sister, and at first she was worried, but as some time passed by she seemed to shrug it off a bit. We finished watching TV and were beginning to clean up around the house when we heard the knob of the entrance door via the garage being fiddled with. It was a bit faint and could have been an animal, which happened a lot. I didn't worry too much, but my sister continued to grow skeptical. This struggling with the knob went on for a minute or so and was accompanied by some jingling and started to sound like something was being stuck in the keyhole. It subsided and then was finished with a firm pound on the door as we heard it echo throughout the house. As someone who was still rather ignorant of danger, I became scared and my sister looked to me as we were in silence. We paused for about 5 seconds out of shock, and before we could make any movements we heard the door from our basement open and slam shut. Our basement staircase was across the house, and there was no way one single person could have covered the distance in that time. Using a separate staircase, we crept upstairs with haste. Both of us ran to my sister's room and we hid in her closet. Once in there, we got on the phone to our parents and informed them. They notified the police and informed us to stay put. In her closet, we fumbled through the dark to grab items we could use to defend ourselves with. She grabbed her snowboard, which had a sharp metal edge on the end, and I could only find nothing better than a sturdy hanger. Both of us breathing heavily, we soon noticed something outgrow the sound of our breaths. We heard footsteps resonate and increase in volume as they clearly came closer and closer to the room. Right as the steps came to a stop, we looked at each other in terror because we knew that person was now in the room. From under the closet we saw light pierce through the crack and the switch was flicked. The person walked around the room and began moving stuff as we could hear from behind the door. The rummaging stopped and the footsteps returned. They were distinctly growing much louder, and the 2 shadows formed beneath the crack of the light under the door, where his feet had prevented light from coming through. The noise I will never forget is when the knob of the closet began to turn. It was met with a stiff halt as we had locked it shut. It was odd, as no doors in our house had locks, but the closet that we were hiding in did have. He jiggled it a bit and gave up after a few shakes. His footsteps grew more distant and soon faded. After about 10 minutes, my sister and I started to feel safe as we no longer heard any sound. She explained to me that the distance from the closet to the window that allowed us onto the roof was only about 5 feet. We mustered up the courage and darted to the roof. Once up there we felt much safer as no one would ever check there. We waited for about 15 minutes and the cops soon came. They arrived and we got back to the house. It was as if we were returning to a completely different house. Everything had been trashed and ransacked. The aftermath left us with stolen jewellery, a mess in our house, and an experience I'll never forget. We're just lucky that the intruder wasn't able to break down the 1-inch wooden door barrier that separated us from him, and I can't imagine what would have happened if he did.